I was seeing it in all sports. You know, I watch a lot of sports. I'm sports mad. I play a lot of sports, watch a lot of sports. And what I was witnessing, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I had to say something, and I had to speak up. I tried to get in touch with the players, the PFA, the Professional Football Association. I got in touch with FIFPro, which was the worldwide players football association of agents, and it was just so obvious to me that there's been such a big spike in the amount of people that this is happening to. And not just that, it was the amount of people in the crowds at games as well, where the games were being stopped every week because there was another incident in the crowd. And I'm like, whoa, hang on a minute. I didn't see this happening when I was playing. And this all coincided with rolling out and all I called for was an investigation, because nobody knew whether this might have been a side effect of having had it, or whether this was a side effect of the vaccine, and I was just trying to raise the alarm.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast with your host, Leigh Brandon. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating and a warm review. And now, here is Leigh, the Radical Health Rebel, with this week's podcast.
Matt le Tissier, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thanks. Good to be here. Thanks for the invite.
It's an absolute pleasure and an honour to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
So today's episode is entitled The Heart of the Matter with Matt le Tissier. And you might be wondering why I'm asking an ex-professional footballer onto a health podcast, and that would be a valid question. Well, important values of mine include that people should have the freedom to make their own health choices, and that health education is freely available without censorship. If people are only able to see a small amount of the information because much of it is censored, how can people make informed choices when it comes to their health and their children's health? Over the last 3 years, censorship of health and medical education across the entire world has been controlled by a selective few, and all other views have been silenced, banned, ridiculed, and open and honest debate seems to be a distant memory. The last 21 of my 26-year career, I've helped people learn how to take responsibility for their own health through education and coaching. And I've witnessed the great results that it brings. And I've also seen the devastation and, in some cases, financial cost that can occur when people hand over their responsibility of their health to others. Over the last 2 years, we've seen a huge medical experiment without any informed consent from the participants, who chose to take part because they believed it was the best thing to do for themselves, to protect others, or because they believed they were forced into it and had no other choice. To discuss the last 3 years and to try to make sense of it and how we can learn the lessons of the last 3 years so that we don't make them again, I'm really excited to have the footballing legend and all-round bloody nice bloke that is Matt le Tissier. So, Matt, to kick things off, particularly for our overseas audience, can you give us a very brief overview of your background, your football career, and your career since you retired from football?
Certainly, yeah. So I spent my entire footballing career at Southampton Football Club from the age of 16 to 33, as soon as I left school. I then, once I'd finished my football career, I moved into the media, where I was freelancing for a couple of years. And then in 2005, I think it was, I joined Sky Sports on a contractual basis, and I stayed there till 2020, when my views on social media, I think, started to become a little bit of a problem for Sky. I was the first person on Sky to refuse to wear the Black Lives Matter badge, and was questioning things, the government narrative on lockdowns and things, and so I lost my job in August of 2020. And since then, I've just continued to speak out about the nonsense that's gone on in the world since then.
Great stuff. And just for the overseas viewers, Matt was very modest as well. For those of you that don't know Matt, he's probably one of the most talented football players this country's ever produced. So Matt was just being very modest there, just to let everyone know.
Yeah, I mean, the football career was a long time ago now, and
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, it was great while it lasted, and I enjoyed it, and I managed to fulfill my dream really of playing for my country as a footballer. So I got 8 England caps, so that was something that was pretty special to me.
And scored probably some of the best goals we've ever seen as well in the Premier League.
Yeah, thank you, mate. That's very kind of you. Yeah, I enjoyed those as well.
Yeah, definitely. So if I can take you back to January 2020,
Yep.
and we saw those scenes from China, people nose diving to their death in the streets. What did you think at that point?
I thought that was the most unrealistic videos I think I've ever seen, quite frankly. And at that point, I smelt a rat, and I thought something's not right here. That doesn't happen. And certainly, if it looked staged, basically, it looked very staged, and I smelt a rat, and I didn't like what I saw. And I didn't like the reaction that our government was having, and the traction that those videos got on social media. I couldn't believe that most people didn't look at those videos and think, actually, that's pretty staged. That's not real. People don't fall over like that.
Yeah.
And yet somehow governments around the world lost their minds and decided that everyone's going to be dropping dead in the streets if we don't lock down, make people stay 6 feet apart, and then stick masks on them a few months later.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was like you. To me, it looked like that was not a natural way that people fall over. But, having worked in health for as long as I had, I'm still there now, but I was hearing very strong rumours for years before 2020 that the pharmaceutical industry were looking to mandate for adults, because they'd already cornered the children's market, they'd already cornered the elderly market, and they saw that there was a big market of healthy people that they weren't tapping into. So my view was, I know where this is going. That was my view in January.
Okay, yeah.
And interestingly, I had a nightmare that the police were knocking on my door to give me a full. That was in January of 2020.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you don't know just how close that came to being. In fact,
absolutely.
There was that talk about the mandating this stuff, and that was just for me a massive red flag. Mandating an that was produced in a very short period of time, so nobody knew what any long-term consequences of it were, and nobody. Still to this day, I don't think knows exactly what's in it, because they've refused to disclose about 20% of what was in the vaccines, as far as I can remember. And so to be able to try to force you into taking that kind of stuff, I was prepared. I was prepared to fight to the death to not have it.
Oh, me too.
Really was. It just for me that was a line in the sand that I would not have somebody forcing some kind of poison into my body, and I would fight all the way. I
mean, let's look at it slightly another way. So, I advise clients on nutrition. You couldn't even mandate a food, because some people can have anaphylactic shocks to food, right? You couldn't even say to people, you have to eat this now for the rest of your life. Yeah. Because if you do that for 7 billion people, you might have 500,000 people die.
Yes.
And they'll say, well, it's a rare occurrence. But when it's a rare occurrence for 7 billion people, that works out to a lot of people.
It certainly does. It certainly does. It was bizarre. I mean, I as far as my limited knowledge goes, when they tried to bring out a polio vaccine back in the 70s, 25 people died, and they called it off because of that amount of people. Now, I mean, I've just come off of a call with Dr. Peter McCullough, who says that in the American VAERS system, there are thousands of people that have died because of the, and it just beggars belief that they're allowing this to continue with those kind of numbers, and it's just crazy.
I guess it does, unless there was a plan to reduce the population, but that's just a conspiracy theory.
Now
right?
You're starting to be a conspiracy theorist, of course. I mean, that label now, I actually wear that label with pride now, because the conspiracy theorists of 2 years ago have got about 95% more things right than the mainstream media have got. So whenever somebody calls me a conspiracy theorist, I actually think, oh, blimey, I've got a lot of stuff right if they're calling me that. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So just taking you back to now March 2020.
Yeah.
So Boris Johnson enforces a lockdown. What were your thoughts then, and what did you think about the other policies or rules that were brought in throughout 2020?
My thoughts then were probably the same thoughts that I still have today, is that the plans that were in place beforehand for pandemics, when they knew the demographics of the people that were at risk of this virus, they should have protected those people and let the rest of society get on with it, and not throw the economy down the drain, because we know that by throwing the economy down the drain, we know that that has impacts on the health outcomes of families and the people in those economies that have been trashed. We know that is going to affect the poorest in society first and foremost, and that's what this seems to have been about. This seems to have been an attack on the poorest people, an attack on the middle classes, small businesses, all that kind of stuff, and it appears that they are kind of going after everyone apart from big global corporations, and that's how it seems to me the last couple of years.
What did you think of the masks and the mask mandates?
The mask mandates were a joke, still are a joke. I can't believe that people were so gullible to think that. Well, maybe at the start, you could maybe think that even though the health experts had come out and gone, well, mask wearing is not going to make any difference. All the top boys came out and said that, and then a few months later, they all flipped and changed their mind and went, no, mask is what's going to be, the thing that stops the pandemic in its tracks, and clearly it didn't, because 99% of people were adhering, because most people just want to do as they're told and hope that it goes away. But even after all this time, there are still people. I mean, I was in Southampton General Hospital earlier today, where there's still a whole heap of people wearing masks. And if masks were effective, this pandemic would have been over 18 months ago. And yet people who are still wearing the masks won't accept that point. They go, well, obviously they work. Well, how do they work? If they were working, there would be no more COVID, because everyone had masks on. Well, 99% of people had masks on. So it doesn't make any sense. It still doesn't make any sense today. And it's for me, the mask wearing was all about testing the population to see how many of them would comply.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, as a health professional, I saw it as my responsibility to look into all the things that were going on, because my job is to coach clients and to educate people about health. So I looked into everything. I mean, I've been using PCR tests for over a decade, so I knew a fair bit about PCR tests. Yeah. But when I looked into the mask issue, there was a couple of really good consultants on the high wire with Del Bigtree, and they work for OSHA in America, which is a bit like the health and safety executive in the UK. And their job is to teach medical staff how to use PPE. And they were saying, well, first of all, you have to train someone to use a mask. So their job is to go into hospitals and to train medical staff and surgeons how to wear them, because if you don't put them on properly, first of all, they don't work. Yeah. And so the next thing is, the viruses are so small that they just go straight through the mask anyway. But that wasn't the worst bit for me. The worst bit was, and there's some obvious stuff that I'll come on to, but they measured the oxygen levels of people wearing a mask, and their blood oxygen is reduced by 20% when you wear a mask. Yeah. And your blood carbon dioxide increases by 50%. I mean, that's a chronic degenerative disease waiting to happen, And then they measured the bacteria and the fungus on the masks of school children that had been wearing them all day, and they were at massively high, dangerous levels. And some people were wearing these things day in, day out. And you just think, if you were coming up with the rules to make it as unhealthy as possible, they probably would have come up with the rules that they come up with.
And I think that's exactly what they have done, and they've dressed them up as rules because they really care for us and they want everyone to be safe. When actually, for the last 2.5 years, we've been living in an upside down world where the truth is actually the complete opposite, basically, to what government has been telling us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we knew very early on. Again, I looked at a lot of studies in March, April 2020. And it was very clear who was at risk. Yep. It was very clear. And
they had the cruise ship, the Diamond Princess, very early on. They had a perfect Petri dish there to let them know exactly, who was at risk and what the IFR was and all that kind of stuff. So they knew very early on that it wasn't a huge risk to a massive proportion of the population.
Yeah. I mean, I looked at studies. I mean, there was Birmingham University did a good study. There was obviously information from Italy. There was information from China. And they all came to the same conclusions. Age and obesity and diabetes and all these kind of conditions were massive risk factors. And, they knew that from the beginning. So anyway.
Yeah.
So you've touched on this already, but I just want to maybe look at it a little bit further. So you were called an anti-vaxxer by the media. Amongst other things, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What did you make of those claims?
Laughable, quite honestly. To be an anti-vaxxer, to me, somebody that's an anti-vaxxer was somebody who's kind of never had a vaccine in their life and never would ever take one in their life ever again. Now, I'd had all my vaccines up until this one turned up. And then because I chose to not take this one because I didn't like the way that it was rushed, I didn't have any long-term safety data to check up against. I knew that my health has been pretty good. I've only missed a handful of days through illness in my entire working life. So I was pretty sure that if I was to get this virus, that I'd be pretty comfortable in fighting it off. And then so to be labelled an anti-vaxxer because of those views was just laughable. And again, I think the biggest thing that this has done, and I don't know if they took this into account, but a lot of people now will be questioning not just this, but because of what they've done with this, they've lost trust in the medical authorities, and they start to question all the other stuff that's going on. And so I think that's been one of the biggest problems over the last few years is that massive lack of trust, not only in the pharmaceutical industry, but I think also in our political system, and I think also in our police force, because the way that they've policed the different protests that have gone on has been absolutely disgusting. If you look at the way they policed the Black Lives Matter rallies, and then you look at the way they policed the freedom protests that were going on in London. Now, you would think that, people protesting for their freedom, that the police would be okay with that, peacefully protesting for their freedoms and their human rights. You'd think the police would just stand back and go, okay, fair enough. And then, the Black Lives Matter stuff, where all the violence was taking place in America, you'd have thought they might be a little bit more heavy-handed with that. Yet their approach to it was completely the opposite. Yeah. As I said earlier, an upside-down world where what you expect to happen is the complete opposite of what is actually happening. So truth and common sense has been flipped on its head.
Yeah, I mean, I was, I went to a few of the protest marches in London, and there was on 3 occasions where we got attacked by riot police. And we were just standing there listening to people speak. That's what we were doing. And I was actually, you may have seen the video, there's a lady that got punched in the stomach who was standing on it. I was right behind her.
Oh, really?
So I was literally, it happened 3 times, and I was literally within 10 yards of, getting a baton smashed over my head.
Wow.
Just for wanting, like you said, wanting freedom.
For peacefully demonstrating, which is our human right.
And then you've got the Stop Oil protests, and the police, hand them food and give them drinks.
Oh, it's unbelievable! What it does it kind of makes it very obvious with the way that the police protest. It makes it very obvious as to whose side the police are on and what kind of money is funding the demonstrations. So the people that are funding those demonstrations, they're obviously have some good connections where they're able to influence how the police police those demonstrations. It's obvious.
Yeah. What do you think of organisations such as the BBC, ITV and Sky News?
Laughable, quite frankly. I think they are a danger to our democracy. Now, that might seem a bit strong, but I think they are, or they have become, agents of the government. And they were meant to be there, meant to be put in place there to hold government to account, and so that the public had an organisation there that were able to question and hold their feet to the fire when they're doing things wrong. And yet, for the last 2.5 years, all they've done is basically been the lapdogs of the government with their messaging, and they've just gone after anybody who questions the narrative. Yeah, it's their job to be questioning the narrative. It's not their job to be smearing, censoring people who are worried for our human rights and our freedoms in this country. And that's exactly what they've done. So they are laughable, and they are organisations that from, I'd say, about the second week of May 2020, have never been on my television because I saw what they were doing. I saw the effect that it was having on people's mental health, my family's included, and I decided that the best thing you could do, and it's a piece of advice I would give to anybody, the best thing you can do is to not watch them.
Yeah, the other thing they did was just ignore anything that wasn't part of the narrative as well. I mean, some of the marches I went on were hundreds of thousands of people. Complete silence from the media.
Yep. Absolutely. It was disgusting. I was on one of the marches. We started it right outside the offices of the BBC for the NHS workers. Yeah, I was at that one. About to be sacked. Yeah. So, and yet, right outside their offices, and they still wouldn't report the correct numbers that were there. And again, it's laughable. They've just become an absolute joke organisation. Yeah, absolutely. And on that vein of journalists, and we've kind of touched on it already, what do you make of these broadcasters and journalists that have been calling people COVID deniers and granny killers, and they should be denied medical treatment, and they shouldn't be allowed out of their house? And now they're saying, well, actually, no, we were right. The facts have changed. What do you think of those media people? I mean, I'm guessing you're kind of alluding to people like Piers Morgan and Jeremy Vine and people like those. Disgusting human beings, quite frankly, with no humanity, and paid stooges, quite frankly. That's the only reasonable explanation I can have for people in their position behaving the way they did. I think it would be very interesting to see who funds them. So, where are they picking up their paychecks from? Because decent, normal human beings wouldn't behave like that. And they were disgusting in the way they spoke about the unvaccinated. If they'd have spoken about any other type of minority group in the way that they did about the unvaccinated, they would have been hounded out of the country. And yet there they were, brazenly, openly happy to do it, and cheered on by the rest of the media. So it was a disgusting time in our history, and I hope that one day I'm alive to see those people brought to justice. Me too. I mean, it's quite interesting because they're saying that the facts have changed. In the first 8 weeks of lockdown, Matt, I was working 16 hours a day researching everything that was going on, and I was producing videos, and I was putting videos out on social media, and it got to a point where I was spending so much time doing videos. I can't do this anymore because I wasn't running. I'd stopped running my business.
right? I mean, I couldn't work anyway because we were in lockdown.
Yeah.
And I thought, what do I do? I've got all this information. I've got to do something with it, but I haven't got time to make it into loads of videos. So I basically made a book, and I made it available online for free because I just wanted people to know this stuff.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to start doing now is re-releasing parts of that book, because we knew, if you were willing to look, we knew exactly what was going on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And these people chose not to look.
That's exactly what they did. They chose not to look, and they chose to just take the dollar to go with the narrative. And there was plenty of evidence. You're right, right from the start. As I said, even from the Diamond Princess, that cruise ship, very, very early on. So people who are now going, oh, the science changed and the facts changed, and all vaccines have worked, so we can get back to normal again. Absolute poppycock. And quite frankly, those people, I can forgive people very easily, but I will never forget what those people did.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people, I know a lot of people who, they do watch BBC and ITV and Sky News, and in America it might be Fox and CNN and whatever, and they've not really seen what's outside of that. Now, you're an ex-football player, right? You're not a scientist, you're not a doctor. But can you share with the audience some of the experts that you've been listening to over the last 3 years that perhaps they wouldn't have heard of?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Dr. Peter McCullough is probably one of the most cited doctors in the world. His knowledge is incredible. The research that he's done on the COVID stuff is just, it's been his full-time job pretty much for the last couple of years. And he's been very active in getting out there, trying to get his voice out there. But again, these people get censored by the mainstream media. They don't want to know about them. He was a contributor to CNN and Fox News and all those guys, because he knew what was going on and chose not to go along with the narrative and take the money from big pharma or big media. He was silenced, and so you've actively got to go and have a look for people like him, for people like Mike Eden, who was working in the pharmaceutical industry for many, many years, who has been speaking out about this. He's been a real hero. Those guys in particular have, really put their heads above the parapet. You look at people like Ivor Cummins, who's a data analyst, but an incredibly good guy on the health side of things as well. He's probably one of the cleverest men I think I've ever spoken to in my life. And so, those kind of guys, there is a lot of information out there if you're prepared to look outside the box, if you're prepared to just say to yourself, hang on a minute, I'm only getting one side of the story here. What's the other side of the story? So that's been one of my big bugbears over the last couple of years, is that, you won't be surprised to know that when I tell you this, that I'm a Libran, right? So I believe in balance, and I believe in fairness, and I believe that we should be able to hear both sides of the story, and then we as individuals should be able to make up our own mind who we trust with the information that's coming out. Because I think if you listen to your gut, and if you listen to two people talk, and you can decide for yourself which one you think is telling the truth. And I think gut instinct is a really important thing.
Absolutely.
Because I think you can really, if you just tune into your intuition, I think you can tell instinctively. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why they did censor people, because I think if both sides of the story were heard, then the majority of the people would come down on the opposite side of the narrative to what the government are giving out.
So what you're suggesting, Matt, is that we should have been treated like adults, not children.
100%. Treated like adults, given the facts, give us everything that you've got, and let us make our own minds up. Give us all the facts. And if those adults who were a bit frightened because there was a virus around that, was quite similar to the flu in terms of its IFR, then they should have had that, been able to make that decision if they wanted to stay inside or not. But I don't think we should have shut society down for what they knew was not, and the British government, by the way, declared it just before we went into lockdown, actually, declared it that COVID-19 wasn't actually that big a deal. It wasn't a high consequence virus, as they pointed out just before they locked us down, which was a massive contradiction. Again, another upside down world.
Yeah. And why do you think that the majority of people were not willing to or didn't know how to look beyond the mainstream media?
Well, this is quite ironic, really, given that in my career, one of the things that was labelled at me is that I was lazy. However, with a lot of time on my hands at the start of everything, I, like you, wasn't lazy, and I went having a look to find out what I could find out about what was going on. But I do believe that most people are lazy in terms of the information they want to take on board, and are quite happy to sit in front of that television and believe everything that comes out of it. When unfortunately, history has told us that there is a lot of stuff that comes out of that television that simply isn't true. And unfortunately, the majority of the population still look at the television and think that, why would they lie to us? Why would they lie to us? They're lovely people, these people in government. They don't give out millions of pounds worth of contracts to their mates and all that kind of stuff. They're really, above board human beings. We should really trust our politicians. Honestly, it's just crackers that people, given how many times it's now been proven. I mean, the BBC alone, I mean, how they're still going after the Jimmy Savile stuff that happened, where they protected the country's most prolific paedophile for many years. And yet they still carried on, and everybody still trusts them. That's what gets me. How do you trust an organisation that protected the world's, certainly our country's biggest prolific paedophile, who incidentally was pretty good mates with our king? Now that's a little bit concerning to me, and I say our king, quite frankly. I don't really recognise him as my monarch, to be honest. I think the time for the monarchy is done and dusted. I think it's time we. After the Queen's reign, I think it was a pretty good time to go. I tell you what, I think let's call it a day there.
Yeah,
but that's a different subject.
Yeah, that's another podcast. That's another episode. That one. What would you say to people if they're listening to this and they do trust the BBC, they do trust ITV, Sky News, the Daily Mail, the Guardian, etc.? What would be your message to those people?
I think the biggest one for me is to kind of point them in the direction of how the media reacted when we went to war in Iraq with the weapons of mass destruction, which the media were happy to plaster all over the place. And obviously didn't really do their checking very well, because it turned out there was no weapons of mass destruction, and that was just used as an excuse to send us to war. So that was just one of the biggest lies that our media portrayed. And there are probably thousands of other examples where stuff you've seen on the news actually turns out to not be quite so true. There's so many examples that those organizations should not have your trust. They should not have your trust. They haven't been truthful to you down the years, and I think it's actually gotten worse as time has gone on, because they've been able to get away with some lies. They've just become brazen about it and thought, we got away with it 20 years ago. We'll just carry on. We can do more. And so those organisations for me are finished as far as my life is concerned.
Have you got any other advice for, if you're looking at an expert, let's say, how would you know when to trust an expert and perhaps when you shouldn't trust an expert?
Well, I think, as I said, your gut instinct is normally pretty good. But if you're listening to experts, they normally can back up what they're saying with data. That's normally a good sign. And the best way to tell, actually, if somebody is telling the truth, normally is if that person is then attacked by the mainstream media, because that's about the biggest clue you could ever get as to if someone is actually being truthful, is that the media will go after them, and quite aggressively. I've suffered that a little bit over the last couple of years, but there are also some people who are just world leaders in their fields of expertise who have gone against the government narrative, and just see how those people have been treated. Go and have a look on Wikipedia. That's another good one. Go look on Wikipedia, and if Wikipedia describes somebody as being spreaders of misinformation or disinformation, that's normally a pretty good clue that they're bang on the money.
Yeah. I mean, I've experienced a similar thing, and it almost confirms when I get things right, which is, I have to say, most of the time. If I put a post on, it's normally Facebook, and if it comes up with a fact check, you're like, okay, I got it spot on.
I'm good. Yeah.
Whether it's to do with COVID or the medical system.
I think that's the other thing, Leigh, is that those fact checkers, they just sprung up the last few years, haven't they? Never used to have fact checkers. And so all of a sudden, and I did a post on Twitter about, I know it must have been about a year or 18 months ago. And it was a simple post, but it rings more true by the day. And all I posted was, who fact checks the fact checkers? Because who gave them, the title of arbiters of the truth? Those people who claim to be fact checkers, what I would say to people is, go and have a look at who funds those fact checkers, right? Because they're funded by a lot of multinational, globalized corporations. And the thing that I've come to understand is that you can't tell people facts and expect them to change their mind because they're emotionally invested in the other side of the argument. Their emotions will outweigh any facts that you give them. So I think the only way that people will change their mind is if they go and see for themselves. So I'm not going to tell you who funds the fact checkers. All I would say is, if you think fact checkers are independently based, go and have a look who funds them, and then go and see if that industry has any relevance on the facts that they're checking. That's all I'll say. And, you've got to have your own curiosity to want to go and find out. Because me sat here telling people who funds them won't make any difference to them. But if they go and have a look for themselves and work it out for themselves, I think they're more likely to change their minds if they see it with their own eyes.
Yeah, I've even been testing some of the theories on climate change recently, and it's so easy to find out what the truth is. You just put something up there, and bang, straight away there's a fact check message. But
that's the next biggest scam. It's all the same people involved, all the same people, and again, it involves the transfer of wealth from the lower and middle classes to the super rich. And until people realise that, they're going to keep getting away with it. They're very clever with what they do. That's why Sage was full of the behavioural insights team. There was way more of them, I believe, than there was virologists and immunologists at the start of COVID. The nudge unit, as they're called.
Big shout out to Laura Dodsworth for her book.
Absolutely, Laura.
State of Fear. Absolutely
Brilliant book, and I've met Laura a couple of times. She's an absolute diamond. So that book was brilliant, and I think opened people's eyes quite a bit to what went on and the psychological manipulation that's gone on in the last couple of years.
Excellent. Just bringing you back to 2020.
Yep.
Did you look into the early treatments that were available for COVID, such as why do you think they were swept under the carpet and banned? Thanks for watching the Radical Health Rebel YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to share with your friends and family, or share via your social media. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to receive notifications of new video clips from the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode, completely ad-free, plus premium content, and join the Radical Health Rebel Patreon community, head on over to the Radical Health Rebel Patreon channel at www.patreon.com/Radical Health Rebel. Thanks again for watching.